Welcome Life Science learners to another installment. I'm Yugan and thank you for joining me today. In our lesson today, we're going to be focusing on biomes, biospheres and ecosystems. The context of this is important. It's important for us to be able to understand what is the biosphere. And then we're going to link that to looking at biomes in the context of South Africa and the variety of biomes we have. And then finally, we're going to look at ecosystems. Let's get straight into unpacking some important terminology as we get into this lesson. We're going to look at some terms, and then we're going to look at the components of biospheres. Right. So let's try and understand the concept of a biosphere. The word bio refers to living organisms, and a sphere refers to something that's a globe. So in terms of the Earth, we know that the biosphere is that part of the Earth's surface where humans and other organisms are able to live. So guys, when we talk of the Earth, we know that the Earth supports a variety of different organisms, life forms. The Earth is regarded as a sphere. So the bio would refer to the living organisms. So if we understand the context of interaction of organisms in the environment, we would need to unpack where do these living organisms exist and how do they interact with the environment. So let's unpack that by looking at what it is made up of. So the biosphere is made up of the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the atmosphere. So these three components form the important parts of the biosphere. We also know that the biosphere extends to about 7,000 to 8,000 meters above the sea and around 6,000 to 8,000 meters below the sea level. So if we just looked at the context of where we are, in the context of where we stand on the surface of the Earth, remember that as we go up further into the atmosphere, there's a large variety of organisms that live there. Likewise, we can go into the surface of the Earth, into the soil, into the deepest parts of the ocean. These are habitats that support life forms. So we refer to them as the biosphere, both in terms of the atmosphere as well as the aquatic parts of the environment. The components of the biosphere, as I mentioned, can be divided into the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. Let's take each one of these and get the context to what they mean. The biosphere consists of, as you would look at this image, the illustrations of the three parts. So in terms of the living components, they interact with the atmosphere, which is predominantly the air that we have in our environment, as well as the earth, which is the lithosphere, and this refers to the soil, the rocks that we have life forms living on, supported by, as well as the aquatic parts or the water in our oceans, rivers, seas, and lakes. And so these three components collectively contribute to the existence of life on Earth. When we look at the atmosphere, it is important to understand what the atmosphere is made up of. What is the atmosphere made up of? Predominantly gases. Let's try and unpack what these gases are. So surrounding the Earth, we have a layer of air called the atmosphere. The gases that surround the Earth are mainly made up of nitrogen, which is about 71%, oxygen, which is about 21%, with a small amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know that water vapor also plays an important part of our atmosphere, and that concentration may vary. We also have a buildup of other gases that make a very small percentage of the gases in our atmosphere. Why is the atmosphere important? The oxygen, the gases that are vital, are important to supporting important processes like cellular respiration, photosynthesis. So we will look at the impact that that has on living organisms. So processes such as respiration, photosynthesis, and the filtering of sunlight help to protect living organisms from the harmful solar radiation. It's important that we recognize that the layer of atmosphere is also an important filter to the harmful UV radiation that we experience on Earth. So that layer is crucial in terms of helping with the absorption of harmful radiation, as well as maintaining the global temperature on the surface of the Earth. And we've mentioned the term global warming and the natural effect of that on the Earth. And so these gases play an important role in maintaining the temperature on the surface of the Earth. So if we unpack that by looking at the composition of gases in the atmosphere, we can see that nitrogen forms a significant component of the gases, with oxygen being the second largest component, making up 21%. We know that carbon dioxide is a very small amount that is steadily increasing, and that's due to human activity, with the other gases forming a very small percentage of that. So guys, the atmosphere is made up of different gases, and these gases are crucial to us being able to survive on Earth. And we know that through human activity, there's a concern around the level of carbon dioxide increasing. And so that's something that we will unpack in another lesson. When we look at the atmosphere, it's important to recognize that the atmosphere is made up of different layers. And this is an extension to our understanding of the atmosphere. So we have a layer called the troposphere, which is then surrounded by the stratosphere, which in turn is enclosed on the external surface by the mesosphere, and then right on the outside we have the thermosphere. So these various levels are the levels of gases that make up the atmosphere. So let's try and understand what the troposphere is. So the troposphere is the layer closest to the surface of the Earth, and we see that that's the layer that we have access to immediately. It extends to about 10 kilometers above the sea level. Humans and plants live in this layer, so we have all forms of life interacting in this. So when we look at planes and birds, they also fly in this layer. As the layer goes higher, the air becomes thinner. And often we experience this as a concept in people that are involved in climbing of mountains. As the altitude increases, or the height above sea level, we find that the air becomes thinner. And essentially, the concept of thinner refers to the depletion of the level of oxygen in the atmosphere. So that's the concept of air becoming thinner. The other layers include the stratosphere, which is about 50 kilometers above sea level. And we look at that, that's significantly higher. It's about 50 kilometers above sea level. If we then look at the mesosphere, which is again measured about 85 kilometers above sea level. So if we were to move 85 kilometers above sea level, that's significantly high, we will move into an area called the mesosphere. And then finally we have the thermosphere, which is about 500 kilometers above sea level, and then surrounding the atmosphere we'll get into the outer space called the exosphere. So these are essentially the layers in the atmosphere. Okay, the hydrosphere, the word hydro refers to water, so this would refer to the layers that are involved with supporting water, and life forms in water. So this consists of water on Earth, and this would include the oceans, which are both the salt water as well as your estuaries, as well as rivers and lakes, which are your freshwater systems. Your freshwater makes up 3% of your hydrosphere, while the remaining 97% is made up of your oceans. And as we discuss this point, it's important that we recognize that our freshwater ecosystems are only 3%. And so if we were to translate that in terms of the access of drinking water to humans, it means that we have significantly a small percentage of that water that is accessible. And within that 3%, we often find that freshwater system, a very small percentage of that is actually accessible to humans. So this should help us to get the context of why it's important for us to be able to conserve our freshwater systems, because a majority of that is made up of your salt or your marine water. It's important to recognize that the hydrosphere provides the water needed by all living organisms to survive. It is the habitat of many aquatic organisms, such as your microscopic plankton, fish, and your large organisms such as sharks and whales. So the diversity of life forms that exist on Earth, a large percentage of that is based in your aquatic habitats. So the hydrosphere forms an important part of the diversity of life on Earth. We then go on to the third component, which is called the lithosphere. And if we look at litho, it refers to the soil. So this is the outer crust of the Earth. It is made up of the rock and soil. Only a thin layer of the Earth's crust, namely the topsoil, supports plant life. So if we were to look at the surface of Earth, we have a very thin layer on the outside, which is made up of the topsoil that supports the plant life. Below that, we have different layers of rock and sand that make up the inner crust of the Earth. So it's a source of ions, which is the soil, and minerals, which living organisms need. The soil is also a habitat for many microscopic invertebrates and larger vertebrates. So the lithosphere forms an important component of our environment in which microorganisms, your invertebrates, survive. And so if we think about that, it supports the development and growth of plant. So this outermost top layer of soil is crucial to sustaining the other forms of life, because that is where most of your autotrophs or your producers are found. And so these rely on the nutrients in the soil to be able to grow and be able to carry out vital processes like photosynthesis. So if we were to look at the three components collectively, these are crucial collectively to the existence of life forms on Earth. So we need the water, we need the gases, we need the oxygen, as well as we need the nutrients from the soil to be able to support the diversity of life forms on Earth. So again, the biosphere is where life forms are covered, and it's in a larger area. To make it easier to study, ecologists have divided the biosphere into smaller and smaller pieces, and these are called biomes, and then further biomes are broken up into ecosystems, ecosystems are broken up into communities, communities into populations, and then individual organisms. So this is a simple illustration to show you that the complexity of life forms. So individuals put together form populations. These populations collectively interact with each other. So when different populations of organisms interact with each other, we refer to that as a community. Communities in turn interact with each other and the non-living components in the area, and we refer to that as the ecosystems. Ecosystems may be found collectively in different areas characterized by the type of environment, the temperature, and we refer to this collectively as ecosystems interacting with each other as biomes. And then if we take several biomes and we put them together and we see how they interact with each other, we get to the concept of a biosphere. So those are the several components in the biosphere if we were to break that down into its smaller building components. So we've looked at the biosphere, and ultimately it's important that we recognize that the components of the biosphere are from the smallest individual to the most complex systems, which we refer to as the biosphere. So guys, we've looked at the components of the biosphere, which were the three components: the lithosphere, atmosphere, and the hydrosphere, and we've unpacked what a biosphere is made up of, right down to the simple organism that we refer to as individuals in a population. You guys have been a good audience. You deserve a little break. Have a short stretch break, comfort break, and I'll see you back in a little while.